Good morning, good evening. Thank you everybody for arriving in here today. We seem to have a bit of an email link issue, and we will rectify that momentarily. Today, of course, we have John Papa presenting on single page apps. John Papa has been presenting for us for a number of times already, and each time has definitely been a bit of an experience. So before we go further, I just want to quickly thank all our sponsors, Orgsweb, Telerik, Pluralsight, and Syncfusion for the support we've had lately. As usual, without you guys' assistance and support, we just couldn't be doing what we're doing. Quick information: if you need to ask us any questions or comments, email us at info@lidnug.org. Follow us on Twitter /LIDNUG, Facebook.LIDNUG, and our archives are also uploaded to our YouTube channel, which also /LIDNUG. Our website, bit.ly/LIDNUG as well. And that's incorrect. Tonight's MC is not Peter Shaw, it's Brian Madsen. Quick 2012 facts. This year we reached 50,000 members. We also had more than 50 events now, and we will continue to show even more events come 2013. So thanks for all the support for the last year, guys. Do appreciate everybody's involvement, contributions. And I'm going to hand over to John. John, thank you very much for coming and visiting us again. And we can't hear John.
I think we've lost him. I can't see him in the attendee list.
Uh-oh.
Bear with us, folks. The presentation gremlins are out in full force today.
Oh, he's in here. Yeah, John. It seems maybe John can't hear me. Now we're also having audio issues.
I'll DM him.
Can you guys hear me now?
Ah, yes, there you are.
Oh, good, good. Okay. I am going to start then if we're all set. I guess I missed my own introduction. I couldn't hear it. So, Brian, are we all set?
We are.
Great. Then we'll just kick right in. Sorry for the slight delay here, everybody. I think we're all set to get going now. So I'm going to switch over to my deck and we'll kick this things off. So I want to thank you all for coming. We've got a good group on here so far. I'm going to talk about how to deal with creating single-page applications, and I'm going to start with kind of the fundamental core aspects of this. I've done several talks on spas lately, single-page apps, and I've hit different groups of people. And one of the things I found is that it becomes really important to talk about what is a spa and what are the core pieces of a spa that you need to have to really kind of deem yourself as a spa. Because we can build web applications with hundreds of features, and those features are important, but which ones are essential to use? So that's what I'm going to talk about here. And I've broken that down into about 4 sections, and we're going to follow through on these. So along the way, I'm going to be presenting different topics, and if you have questions, please fill them into the Q&A. I'll answer them in bunches as they kind of queue up. I'll also stick around at the end of the presentation for questions for as long as you guys need. And if you have questions afterwards, you can always find me on Twitter at @John_Papa. And that Twitter URL is right here in the bottom left. I'll also make all these demos available on my blog. So what's the agenda? We're going to talk about what is a spa, and we'll go through this relatively quickly, but I think it's important to set the guidelines of what are we talking about. And then we'll get into a concept I call raviolis, which are the different modules that you're going to be using in your application when you build your spa. So what are the different pieces, and why do I call these things raviolis? Then we'll get into data binding and how we can use a pattern like MVVM to help us create a more robust spa. How we deal with page navigation. So a demo app is great because you've got one page, but most applications have more than one page. So how do you deal with having multiple pages in your application? And then we'll also talk about how you can have rich data. So beyond just getting a list of people, for example, you might have full object graphs, caching of data. You might want to sync data between multiple pages. How can you manage to do that within a spa? And over here on the right, you can see that the spa, one of the questions I get a lot is that how do you deal with having mobile devices, whether it's an iPhone or an Android or a Windows phone, or if a tablet of some sort, can you make these applications work across devices? And the answer to that is absolutely. I'll take a few breaks in there for my voice because I'm just getting over a cold here. So the key to all this is going to be, why do we even bother with a spa? And the whole point of this is that the user experience is the king. We want to make sure that our application is really, really rich for our users. And if that's the case, if that's what you're trying to build, a spa is a great choice. If you're just looking for what is a great application to build for anything, no matter what the device, no matter what the technology, there really is no one answer to everything. But if you're looking for a really great, rich user experience in multiple devices that can work in the web, a spa is great. So how do you define this? Well, one of the definitions we were tinkering with here is you want to build something that's rich and responsive like a desktop app. But you want to build that so it's built with HTML5 or HTML4 and CSS and JavaScript. So that's one reason to use a spa. And, well, what is that? A spa is going to be something that fits on a single web page. It doesn't mean you have one view. You could have multiple views or tabs or anything you want on there, but it fits on one page, and you get that really fluid experience by loading all the necessary code with that single page load. And the key word here is fluid and necessary. You want a fluid user experience, and you only want to load the code that you need to move around your application right off the gates. So for example, if I'm having an application like CodeCamper where I'm loading in sessions and events and people and rooms and all this information about an event like a tech ad, I only want to pull the information in on the initial load that I'm going to use on most of the pages and be most commonly used by the users. Anything that's not going to be used all the time, I'll go get those on demand. So I'm not saying load everything, just load everything that's necessary. So when might you be a spa? Well, you might be a spa if you're maintaining navigation or deep linking. So you want to deep link to certain pages of the site, and you don't want to refresh the page. You want to avoid that information, avoid that refresh. You want to persist information on the client, whether it's in local storage or in cache in the browser. You want to load most of your information on the page when it first loads up, and you want to progressively download features as you need it. If you're looking for these kind of features and that's in your requirements, that's a great place for a spa to really take over. Now, you may have heard this before, but let's say you're building an application and there's things that are in a spa that you may have seen in other applications, like asynchronous services. You may make a call to get async data. Well, you might want client application logic, so you're putting all your presentation logic on the client inside the browser. You might have long-lived client state. You might have two-way data binding, something like we have with MVVM. You could tombstone your app. What happens when somebody closes your application, your browser, and then they open the browser back up to your app? Should it restore the state that they had? Well, if you have all of those things, they could also be likened from a spa to a Silverlight app, or they could be likened to a Windows 8 app. So we could take the same analogy for a spa. We've got a rich user experience in the client, and you could really apply that to mobile devices for Droid or iOS or for Windows, and you could also apply those to things you've done in the past as well. So this is not something that's brand new. The concept's been around. It's just now we're applying it to the web so we can do this truly cross-browser and multiple platforms. And we're not targeting a single device. We're targeting reach. So that's kind of the key of what a spa is. Let me flip over to some demos real quick and show you how some of this could work. And I'll do the gentle pause because I know there's a video refresh as I bounce around here. So the first demo I'm going to show is kind of what could you do with a spa. And hopefully the video is catching up with you here. So here's the CodeCamper application, and if you want to browse to this yourself, there is a link that you can go to. I have a short link for it. It's jpapa.me/CodeCamperDemo. If you go to that, jpapa.me/CodeCamperDemo, you're going to find the CodeCamper application up here. And this is a live site, so I never know what data people are going to fill in. And you can see all the information that's bouncing around. Now what happens on first load of this application, if we look at the browser's debugging tools, is we get a lot of information loaded up right out of the gates. So let me show the debugging tools inside of Chrome, and then I come back over to Network, and let's refresh the page completely. When I do that, we're seeing a lot of information on the left. Let's just narrow this down now to the XHR, for our XML handler requests. And here we can see that we've got rooms. That's doing a web API call to go get a list of rooms. We've got a specific one here to get a favorite, which is a session. We've got some more web API calls to get speakers and tracks and time slots. If we click on one of these, let's say the speakers list, you'll see here some JSON that's returning back the information for all the speakers. Notice all I'm getting about the speakers is their ID and the first name and last name, and if they have an image, and that's it. I don't get other information about the speaker because when I'm looking at my app from a glance, I know that we're going to want to bounce around from session to session and look at different speakers, but I don't necessarily need to know that the speaker was from Nantucket. I don't need to know that the speaker has a big long bio and what he did in his entire lifetime. I don't need to know every session that they're speaking at. I just need to know here's their picture, there's the first and last name. If I go to a speaker's page and I dive into a specific speaker, then I will go get more information about that. But on first load, I'm caching all of the information I need to bounce around on these pages without doing a page refresh. So how do we prove that? Well, let's go back to the network tab here and then clear out what's going on with the XHR. So now we have no requests in there. And if I go from favorites to sessions, notice there's no more network requests. No more as I'm bouncing to speakers here, other than getting an HTML page for a template. I keep bouncing in and out of here, and all the data has been cached for myself. But if I dive into the session here for single-page applications, I'm going to go off and I'm going to make a request to get the information about that session. This is when I get every piece of information about the session that I need. I didn't need to go get the tracks again, or the time slots, or the rooms, because I got those in the first load. Anything I'm going to be loading a combo boxes that's static, I'll just get those once. And if I hit the back page, there's no more content changes in the network. And if I dive into a speaker, let's say I go in here to, we'll look at John Papa. We made another request down here to go get information for that speaker there. So we have the information we need, and we can bounce around pretty quickly and easily. And the advantage of this in the spa is that you can resize your browser. You can use CSS to change it. And notice as I shrink down slowly, the whole CSS changes its layout. So as I get to the phone layout, it still looks good and it's still usable. And in fact, you may notice in the phone layout, I've got just key information here, like the name and the title of the session. As I open up the browser more, I'm also showing tags about what's accurate about the session. Is it knockout? Is it JavaScript? What's the level of the session? So on a bigger view, I show more data. On a smaller view, I use media queries with CSS to knock down and trim it out because I don't want to show all that text. So these are just some examples of how a spa could work in an application. And I'm going to break down how we can build this kind of a thing here. So let's go back to our content. And here we'll switch back into the slides. So now we know what a spa is. You may have seen some other spas as well, things like Gmail or Facebook. Those kinds of applications, notice as you're moving through them, you're not refreshing a lot of data and doing postbacks. It's just manipulating the DOM in the browser that you're in to make it a lot easier for you. So what's the next step? Once you've got this idea of creating a spa, where do you start? One of the places to start is to think about how am I going to break my code apart? Because everyone talks about JavaScript, about being this messy language that's difficult to maintain and structure. Well, it's not so bad. It's like anything in life. If you do it in a unorganized and unstructured way, well, it can be difficult to maintain. JavaScript is no different in that. The one thing with JavaScript is it's very, very powerful. But in the same sense, with that power, you have to come with a little bit of structure there. So the concept of raviolis can really help you out. Raviolis are modules. Why do we want raviolis? Because we all want to avoid function spaghetti code. Think of all the noodles in your spaghetti here as different modules inside your JavaScript. What's a module? Well, let's say you've got something that has a distinct responsibility, like I have a module that goes and gets my data from Ajax. I have a module that lays out my screen. Maybe I have a module that's the view model for my page that has all the data representation. Or maybe there's another module that handles all the page routing. All those different things, you might relate those in .NET to a class or in Java to a class. All those different things are modules. Well, if you intertangle them like spaghetti, they become really difficult to make reusable code out of. So what do we do about this? We don't know who's responsible for it. We have a lot of global scope pollution. We can introduce a lot of bugs without knowing about it, too. This is where the ravioli concept comes in. You take the same modules you had before, and you use separation of concerns to break these out. So each ravioli might be something like a view model, or local storage, or handling how you get your data from Ajax, or doing page routing. And we can use these different things to promote better code reuse. One way to get there is to use a pattern called a revealing module pattern. So let's say I've got this JavaScript code, and inside of it, I want to be able to go and hit Ajax to get a list of people. So to do that, what I can do is I can call to my URL, make an Ajax call, and then I can get the JSON and return it back to a screen. Well, I might want to get a list of people on 5 or 6 different screens. Do I want to repeat this code everywhere? Probably not. If you're like me, anytime you write the same code twice, you start thinking, I better encapsulate this and put it somewhere together. So one way to do that in JavaScript is to create what's called a module. And what I've done here is I said I'm creating this module called data service. It's going to be responsible for making all of my Ajax calls. And it's going to talk to the web API and get my data. So other people will be able to say data service.getPerson, and it'll just give me a list of people. I don't care how this module does its job. If I'm somebody who needs a list of people, I'm just going to call this module and say data service get person. So internally, we've got this base URL. Nobody needs to know about that except for this module. So I just keep it there as a local variable inside the module. And then, anything I want to expose publicly, I put in the return statement. So what this is effectively doing is returning an object. This data service becomes an object that the function returns, and it's got a property called getPerson, which then just points to this function, which will go off and get the people. Excuse me. So when we're dealing with modules, what are these core libraries we have to use? We just showed a quick glimpse at jQuery. There's a couple others you may want to use too. jQuery is excellent because it's on practically 50% of the world's browsers and different websites. It'll let you manipulate the DOM and make Ajax calls. Another one I like to use is Knockout. Knockout will help you do data binding. So without Knockout, what would you do? You'd have to do a lot of push and pull with jQuery to say, here's my data. Now go find the fields on the screen and stick my data in them. And then, by the way, when I'm done and I want to press save, go get those values out of those fields again and pull them back into my JavaScript and save them. Knockout eliminates all that plumbing code. It makes it easy to say, this property is associated with this place on the screen, just automatically tie the two together, so changes in one or the other will just replicate. Another module I like to use is called Breeze. Breeze is relatively new. It's only been around for a couple of months. It's currently in RC, release candidate, and it allows me to use rich data. And we'll talk more about what rich data is in a couple more slides and demos here. But the bottom line is when you want to do things like object graphs or caching of data or synchronizing data between multiple screens, you can write a lot of code to do that, or you can use a tool like Breeze to do this. For those of you familiar with Upshot, it used to be a library that was created and maintained by Microsoft, which no longer exists. That library Upshot is something that's very akin to Breeze. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Another library I like is Sammy. And this one will allow you to do navigation and page history. So Sammy is great for allowing us to do that paging back and forth that we had in the browser. And then finally, I'll do a shameless plug. If you want to show alerts on your page, you can use the library that I wrote called Toaster, which will pop up alerts to users. So these are the 4 libraries here, the top 4 that I really recommend you start with when creating some kind of a spa. jQuery for your Ajax, Knockout for data binding. You need some kind of rich data, very likely, if you're going to build anything more complicated than one level of data. And then Sammy, or an akin library that will help you do navigation between different pages. So we've also got custom raviolis, things like a bootstrapper. You may want to have a module that kicks things off. You might want to wrap navigation in a router. You might want to put your data in models on the client. We all know about models on the server. We could have models on the client to manage your data. You might want to create a view model on the client, which is basically just the presentation logic for your screen. And then you could also have a data service, which we showed a quick glimpse at earlier when we talked about raviolis, which can wrap up all the calls to your web API. That way I don't have to worry about, am I using Ajax, am I using the web API? I just say, data service, go get my people. So the key here is modularity really helps us break out all the different roles and functionality that we have in our application using JavaScript, and it helps us make it more testable, and it makes it easier for us to change things. So if you don't like that, I'm using Sammy for routing, you could put in a different functionality using a different library, like maybe history.js to do your paging and routing. If you don't like Knockout and you want to use Angular, you could switch Knockout out and use Angular to do that. And the whole concept of modularity is making it easy to separate out your different pieces so they don't have these very tightly coupled applications. So let's take a look at how some of this works. Let's go look at a ravioli demo. All right, so I've got this application which I call Code Camper Jumpstart, and I'm going to run it. And again, all the code you're going to see here, you'll be able to get access to the Jumpstart code. So here's a lightweight version of Code Camper, which just has a lot of features trimmed out, so we can focus on the real key pieces. And here we've got sessions and we've got speakers with a very white background. What we're doing in building this application is we've had just a couple pieces of information to view. So let me zoom in. Hopefully zoom in works with the webcast. Okay, maybe we can't zoom in. So we'll try over here just by moving over. Over in the scripts app folder, we've got a couple different pieces. We've got app, which is a module. That's going to be like configuration information. We've got our bootstrapper. Hey, there's our better late than never, right? To the party, the magnifier. Let me get rid of that. Go away. So you've got the bootstrapper. Let's take a look at that module. This module is going to kick everything off when we start. So notice everything that I have inside of these parens over here, everything I've got inside those parens is going to run theoretically when we start the application up. So what I've done is said, all right, here's a function. This bootstrapper is a function, and it's an immediately invoked function execution. So this is what you call an IIFE, immediately invoked function execution. So we say that, it's an immediately invoked function. This is really, really important concept inside of modularity. What we're doing here is we're saying define this function all the way from here down to what I'm highlighting over here. And then immediately execute it. So we're going to execute it right away. So we're defining this, and we're saying go ahead and bind up my data. This is going to take Knockout and say bind my view model, and then using jQuery to this element on the screen. And I'm binding two different screens. And then I'm registering my routes and my router. We'll talk about what the router is in a little while. That's the paging mechanism. And then I just have a little message using Toaster saying everything's good and golden. And then the key is these parentheses here allow me to immediately run the bootstrapper. So as soon as this application starts, this guy is going to run and we're good to go. So what is it doing here? If we look at some of these other guys, like we could take a look at the view model for sessions. Let's go look at him real quick. Here's a module for the sessions. Notice I have the same pattern. Everything inside of here is the definition of that session. And then I'm only exposing activate and sessions for it. So I run it as soon as it kicks off here, and then I have the sessions object that I can use, and I can say sessions.activate or viewModel.sessions, which is just an observable, which allows me to get my list of sessions up there. So all these different modules, they're very, very small sets of code. Here's another view model. I can also take a look at my data service. And in my data service, notice I've just got two methods, speaker briefs and sessions. If I expand this, you can see all of this logic in here that I use to go get my list of speakers. I don't really care about that logic in my view model. I just want to go get that list of speakers. So all I'm doing is exposing to get session briefs, and then for my view model, I can say data service.get session briefs. So if I go back to my sessions here, you'll see that exact line of code right there. So the idea of modularity is my view model here, in practice, will call another module called a data service who has a method like get session briefs, and it's expecting that that method is going to fill its list of sessions here. It does not care that we're using jQuery's AJAX to go off and hit the web API. It does not care where it's getting the data from whatsoever, nor should it. And this allows you to change how the data service works without changing any code at all inside your view model. So it's a nice way to do separation. And as you can see, there's very, very small modules in this code. We've got our bootstrapper. We've got some models here which define things like speakers. We've also got our data service, which allows us to go get our information. And then we've got the bootstrapper, which kicks it all off. And let's go ahead and save that. So that's the idea behind those raviolis and the modularity. We've got all of our guys in here. And one of the things I like to do is I like to put all of my scripts inside of a subfolder called app. This allows me to do a couple things. First, notice as I'm showing you all this, I don't have to look at any third-party libraries. I can just see the ones that I'm using in my application. And then any third-party libraries, I either put them in the root of the scripts folder, or I put them in a subfolder called log, which is what I've done here. Now you can see I'm using jQuery, I'm using Knockout, I'm using Moment, which helps me format dates, and I'm using Sammy, so I can do my page routing. And then down here is Toaster. So it makes it very easy by breaking these out into different subfolders, and I can keep my ravioli separate from each other. So let's go back to the presentation. All right, we should be caught up on video here. So the next topic is data binding. How does this work? How can we get this in JavaScript? Because without it, we have to do a lot of jQuery work. So there's a concept called MVVM, Model View View Model. And this is really handy in the XAML world. And it's kind of moved over into the JavaScript world now, too, with spas, with a library known as Knockout. So the idea is we're just using more raviolis. We're building on that concept of modularity by saying, hey, some of our raviolis are views. Those are screens which are going to present information. I don't have any logic in there. It's just presentation. And then I've got another ravioli that might be my view model. That's the presentation logic for my view. It contains all the logic on how to get the data and show it in my view. And then maybe other fields that aren't from my database. Things like show this one or a full name. We don't store the full name in the database. We store the first and last name. So the view model might have more information like that. And then finally, we might have models. That's the other piece of MVVM. So you got model, view, view model. The models are data themselves. If we have multiple screens, which most apps will have, you'll have a view for each screen, probably a view model for each of those views, and then they might share data. So if I have to show tracks on every screen in my CodeCamper app, I have one track model, but I don't want to copy that model everywhere. What I want to do is if all of my view models point to the same model, that way I can share the data that's up there, so I don't have to keep retrieving it every time. So MVVM helps me get the data, put it in a nice ravioli modular way, and then use data binding to show it on the screen. So how might I use data bindings in the CodeCamper app? Well, one way to do this is you might have a screen like we've got a filter, and on this filter here, I want to type in the name of a speaker or a title or track, and then I want to bind the information that's in here directly back to my screen, so when I press refresh or I press go, I can actually go ahead and search for the information. So how does that work in the HTML? Up here, with the way Knockout works, is we say data-bind, and then we tell it what are you going to bind to, and there's two parts. The first is what are you going to bind to on the screen? The value of this input. So I want to use the value property of this input element. And what am I binding to that? I'm binding to an object called sessionFilter.searchText. So there's some property in my view model called sessionFilter.searchText, and that's what's going to be stored in there. So simply by typing into this field, it's going to automatically update my JavaScript object to say, here's the search text you're searching for. And we use this throughout the application. For example, how did I know which dates I had for my navigation? Well, I use bindings to do that. How did I get the filters to work? We use the filter binding. All the data in here, this is a list of sessions, and in that list of sessions, I've got the speaker, I've got their title for the session, all sorts of information. All that's using bindings. There's no code to push and pull the data back and forth. This is all using Knockout to do that. Oops, and that's a bad slide. I'm not sure where that came from. So we're going to skip over that. So the view model's role in this whole thing is how do you get the data onto the screen and then get it back into your objects and handle pushing and pulling data without running a lot of plumbing code. Let's take a look at that in a demo. So we're back in the demo called CodeCamper 101, and if I can pull up the demo real quick, there we go. It's called Jumpstart 101. All of this is using data binding. So if we wanted to look up a session, like Scott Guthrie's keynote here, we can right-click it and do Inspect Elements. And what we're actually doing down below is we're saying here's an H1, and I'm using data bind equals text title. So we're actually binding the title there where it says keynote we're binding that to this property called title, and it's going to be set to be text of the H1. And for the image here, we've got the same kind of thing. We could go and look at the inspect the elements. We have an image. We're data binding its attribute for source equal to a property called speaker's image name. And that's where I get that speaker's image name. So there's no jQuery, there's no JavaScript to push and pull the data. It's all happening through data bindings. And in our code, what we're doing is we're saying, well, let's look at the list of sessions. Here's my list of sessions right here. I put them in an observable array. So Knockout gives me this option to create a list of items, an array of items, and I put it inside of an observable array. I have an empty array to start, and then my data service goes off and gets all my sessions, it shoves it in that observable array, and then I expose that publicly off of my sessions view model. So then if I go look at my view inside my page, you can come down into here now, we can look for the title, and right down here, we can see the div for the title, and then we've got the title in here, and then we've got all of our properties for our speaker. So we've got the image name, time slot, level, track, code. Here's the title inside the H1 that we looked at briefly before. Speaker's full name and then their tags. All those are properties of each individual session. How do we get to the session? Because you remember the view model, we looked at sessions. That's a list of sessions. So in here, what we had to do is say, for every one of these, notice here I've got the section tag. I say data bind for each session. For each is a command in Knockout that says, loop through the list of items in this array. It's basically creating a template. So I'm saying for every thing inside the sessions observable array, remember sessions observable array is right over here. It's my sessions array that I got from my JSON. And then all this code there is going to repeat. So I have 100 sessions, I'm going to have 100 of these articles inside there. And then for each article, the data context is now changed from being the sessions list to an individual session in the array. So it's a way of basically, think of this as writing a for loop where you've got an iterator and you're looping through each item in the array. It's going to repeat this article for every one that I have in there, which makes it kind of handy. So you can just say, all right, here's the template I want to use. That's going to be what I use to display my sessions. Just please use that. And then all the properties I'm looking at, the time slot, level, name, and title, they come from the object in my JSON. So if we went to look at the browser's debugging tools, and we refresh the page, one of the things we're going to see as the data comes across in the XHR is a list of sessions. Here we can see each session. There's an ID. The first one has a title of keynote. So you can see that right up there. We've got the code as key 1. That's pointing over here. We've got the speaker's first name is Scott and the last name is Guthrie. So all these properties are coming in my data, and I can refer to these now inside of my screen just by using data binding. So now we've seen two things. We've seen how to use modularity to separate out our different modules, different kinds of behavior, and we've seen how to use Knockout pretty easily to do some data binding with our UI. What's the next step? Let's take a look. Here's the dramatic pause while we wait for the screen to reload. There we go. So the next step is, how do we get navigation here? We have different pages in here, and that should say view. That's my great spelling. So how do we get different pages in here so we can have speakers and sessions and favorites and other things? Well, why do we even want to do this? So the whole point I keep getting asked about spas is, why would you not want to do a postback? It's good to think about this a lot. Don't just do something because somebody says it's the cool latest technology, but think about, what would I do if I didn't have this? So in a regular application, in a web application, I would post back every time I click on a new page. In a spa, we can alleviate that and improve the perceived performance for the user by using basically hashtag navigation. So how does this work, and why do you want to do it? You're building this up. You can build transitions and animations to really help improve performance. So users are seeing a little bit of animation when you have slight delays, which kind of just drifts the mind to a different direction so they don't think it's taking so long. We can do that with a spa. Another thing we can do is avoid a complete page refresh, which in some cases is very quick, especially in demos, and then in real life and in web apps, usually it takes a few seconds. Users don't like those full refreshes, so we can avoid that with a spa. Another option is we can have the data ready to go. So any data we need right out of the gates, we can get that on the fly. And instead of having to get new data every time we go from one page to the other, we can just keep it around and then it's toggle between them. So all these three things together can really help us improve that performance for the user. It's really perceived performance because it means we're getting an initial upload hit of getting all the information we need, not the entire app, but just the information we need. And then we have all that data so we can toggle between different screens. Now, one way to do that is to use a different library, something like Sammy or History.js. So in the browser, what does this mean to the user? We can hook into the navigation up in the URL up here, the address bar. So when somebody types something in, we can intercept that, and we know what's going on. And we can avoid page refreshes. We can also hook into the browser history, the forward and back buttons. So people click the forward and back buttons, we can still keep them in our app, and it looks like they're going between different pages. We can transition between multiple views. We click on favorites and sessions and speakers without doing a page refresh. And we can pass parameters between the views. So that's all the technical stuff. What does it really mean? It means when your user uses your application, whether they use the back buttons, the forward buttons, or they click on your screen somewhere, they're actually staying on the same page, and they don't have that appearance of a refresh. They don't have those delays that you get. They don't have the flicker on the screen. Everything is much more smooth and fluid. So how do you do this? Well, there's a couple steps using a tool like Sammy, and that's the one we're going to be using here. So Sammy is a nice library which allows you to intercept all the calls that the browser gets in the address bar. So we can say sammy.get, and the first parameter is when somebody does this, and then the second parameter is do this. So it's kind of like a before and after effect. If somebody has the URL of sessions and then a parameter, colon and Sammy is a parameter, so someplace in session/7, I'm going to intercept that route, and then I'm going to perform this function. So the third step is, what does that function do? I'm going to go ahead and call my viewModels method, and I'm going to pass it any parameters. The parameters could be like what session did they click on, number 7. And then optionally, I can do another thing like create an animation. I could say presenter.transition to this view from here. That gives you that nice sliding effect. What do you need minimally? You need to have the before here. Here's the route I defined. When you see this route, go ahead and call this function, and then inside that function, do something to load the data to basically show that particular view model. And most of my view models have a method I call activate, and I'll call the activate method here and say, when you first load it up here, this is what I want you to show. Let's take a look at that. So back in the Code Camper Jumpstart, when we flip between different pages, you'll notice here in the address bar, you can see the name of the server, hash, and then speakers. If I click on sessions, you'll see sessions. And let's go back and forth a couple times. There's no network activity. We saw that earlier. If I click on the network here, there's no network activity going on because I've already got the data. But notice this now. If I click on the back button in the browser and I hold it down, look at the history I have. This is every page that I just clicked on. So as I was going between sessions and speakers, they're all here. I can actually jump back to one at a time. I can use the button and click on these again, and I can just use the back button to toggle, or the forward button. And it's not doing a page refresh. So to prove that again, we'll show the network tab. So I'm clicking here, there's no network activity. Then I'm going to the back button. There's no network activity here, forward or backwards. So the idea behind this is make it easier for your users to have a quick, seamless transition. How does that work? Well, I've got this router here, which handles all the data for me. And all I did is I set up this route config file. This route config is basically all the data to define my routes. When somebody clicks on the sessions route, that's the title of it I have here, I say, well, what was that route? I go out and I have a variable here called app-hash-sessions. App-hash-sessions is right there. I'm saying if somebody clicks on a route that's got the word sessions in it, do this. If somebody clicks on a route that's got speakers on it, do something else. So somebody clicks on the sessions route, load this view here. It's got a title of sessions, that's what's going to show up in my history, and then call this method. I'm going to call viewModelSessionsActivate. So all of this right here is the key for it. What view do you want to load when they click on this route, and then what do you want to do when that happens? I'm going to call viewModelSessionsActivate. So I go look at SessionsActivate. Here's my method. In my SessionsActivate, I'm just going to say, hey, look, if you've already initialized yourself, just get out of here. If you haven't, please go get the data. So this is one way I could cache the data, just by saying I've already got it, so get out of here. And now I'm going to go get my data. And notice I'm only 15 lines of code when it's an entire view model, which is pretty tight. So that's the idea behind the paging and the routing. So now we've talked about paging, routing, view models, data binding, and modularity. Let's go back and look at the session and look at the final piece that I feel is really important when you're building this kind of an app. So I've been demonstrating the CodeCamper Jumpstart. When we first started off, we looked at the full-blown CodeCamper. The full-blown CodeCamper application, which is in my Pluralsight course, the SPA course, actually has a lot of other functionality. It does local storage, and it does caching of data, and it's got filtering and sorting and grouping, whole bunches of things. And it actually synchronizes a lot of data too. But in this application, I'm just showing the core features. The Jumpstart is showing really what do we need. Modularity, we need view models with data binding, we need page navigation. But there's one further step that I really like, and that's having rich data. Because anytime you go from a demo type application, which the CodeCamper Jumpstart is, it's the demo, and you move up to a real application, like the full-blown CodeCamper app that's in my course, you need to add a lot of functionality, and that's where something like Breeze can really help you out. Now you can write this code yourself, which is what I did in my SPA course, or you can use something like Breeze to help you there. So what is rich data, and why do you care? That's a really good question, and that's one of the first questions I asked when I started looking into these. You have to understand when you build an application that we do so much more than just get data. All the demos that you see, they always look great. And remember, when you see a demo by Microsoft or Google or by me or by anybody, the demos are pre-scripted, so we're going to show you exactly what works well. But as we know in the real world, we have a lot of situations that aren't always demoware. We have to solve real business problems. And we don't often just get data and show it. A lot of times we have to munge the data. We have to put it together. We have to cache the data, handle object graphs. How do you handle change tracking? That's where a tool like a rich data tool can help you. So we do care about rich data. We can get things like caching of the data on the client. We go get a list of people. We don't want to have 4 screens going to a list of people. We want 4 screens showing one list of people. Maybe let's call that a data context. We create a data context in the client, and we throw all of our people in there, so all the different view models can share it. Caching helps us do that. We can also get change tracking out of this. We want to know on an editing screen, has something changed or has it not been changed? So we can enable or disable save buttons or cancel buttons. Maybe want to disable navigation if somebody's in the middle of a save. What about querying data locally or on the server? What if you get your list of people back and you've got 100 people, 100 speakers, and then you want to find all the speakers who are speaking on Friday in a particular room? If you want to do that, you don't want to go hit the AJAX service again. You want to write some kind of a query locally on the client. How would you do that? Or vice versa, you want to go get a specific subset of data on the server, not get a whole list of every attendee. Maybe there's 2,000 attendees at your event. You don't want to get all the attendees, bring them to the client, and then filter them. You want to maybe pass an OData filter back to the server so you can only get the people you want. So while we're drawing up a list of all the things we want to do, what about extending your model? A lot of times the model we have on the server is not what we want on the client. Maybe we just want a list of people on the server. We've got first name, last name, and their ID. On the client, we want to add a bunch of other information about like a full name property that concatenates first and last together. Or we start adding other things that are only for the UI. So we want to be able to extend our models on the client, but not pass that data back to the server either. And finally, dealing with object graphs. Demos are great when you've got just a list of people. But what happens when you have customers, and customers have orders, and orders have order details? Wouldn't it be great if we go get a new order detail, and we already have the order on the client, that it just automatically knows on our client side how to associate that order detail with that order? Well, that's stuff that you can write yourself. And rolling your own is a great option. It's something I spent a lot of time doing with the CodeCamper application in my SPA app. And one of the things I pointed out more than once in the course, in the Pluralsight course, is that this was the most problematic and time-consuming thing I did, is handling and managing all my data in a module that I call the data context. And I wrapped it up as good as I could inside of a module, but still, I felt like it could have been a lot better. So another option is there's a tool called Breeze. It's breezejs.com, and SPA company's been doing data manipulation for years and years and years in other platforms like WPF and WinForms. They're called IdeaBlade. And Breeze lets you do all these kinds of things. And I'm going to show you how simple it is to change what we did in the CodeCamper Jumpstart from not using Breeze to then using Breeze. So how does Breeze work? Well, one of the things we talked about was creating queries on the client. Wouldn't it be nice if we could use link on the client in JavaScript? Well, look at this code here. I'm just saying create a query from the speakers object, order it by last name and first name. This code looks like it could be in .NET and C#. It's not. It's JavaScript. Breeze gives us this entity query object, and I can then say, go look at this service, this resource called speakers. And from all the data that's going to come back out of that, I want you to sort it by first name and last name. Well, I can also do things like where clauses. So I've got that in there as well. So I can co-create my query. That doesn't actually execute it. Then I can say, go to my manager, my Breeze object, that handles all of my queries. And I say manager.execute query, pass in the query I want, and then what this is going to do is execute query is going to go hit the AJAX service. It's going to go off to the server, in web API in this case, get my data, sort it, and then if it works, in the then, it's going to call this method called query succeeded. If it fails, it's going to call my query failed. So this is operating asynchronously, and then if query succeeded happens, my data will come back as a parameter, and then I can say, set my speakers observable array equal to the data.results. Now this code is pretty clean, much easier to handle. Behind the scenes, what it's also doing is saying, now I know what speakers are on the client. Breeze then, in its manager, will then say, I have this context, I have this awareness of what speakers are. And now that I know what speakers are, next time you ask for speakers, you don't have to go to the server and get them if you don't want to. I've got them. And you can have multiple screens query against this local context and get the data in and out of there. You can merge the data, you can do change tracking, all sorts of fun stuff. And that's all built in. So let's take a quick look at how we could do this in a demo. And here I'm going to show before and after, with and without Breeze. So here we've got a CodeCamper Jumpstart. And notice in my data service, when I go get my list of sessions, I'm going off here and I'm saying, go to this AJAX service, and if it worked, call this method, and for every item I have in my array, go ahead and push them into this array called sessions. And notice inside of here, I'm saying, push it into sessions. What am I pushing in? I'm saying, first, go create a new instance of a session brief. This is an object I had to create, and I accept the JSON that comes from the web service. I create a new session, and then I push that session into the array. So there's a lot of little logic going on in here, and there's other things I'm deferring to, like the model session brief. If we go over to model, here's my session brief up here, and that guy is going to go down and create this session brief object. And it's going to return it, and it's got all these properties that I map. Now, when I get that data back in CodeCamper Jumpstart, I'm not sharing data anywhere. I have no context. This sessions actually gets put back on my view model. So if another view model comes and asks for a list of sessions, it's going to get its own sessions and have no awareness of the sessions that are in the other view model. So for example, if I share the speaker's information on two screens, which I do in this application, then I won't be able to share that data thoroughly with this example because I have a list of speakers on both screens basically. So how do we stop doing that? Well, fortunately, we have another step here. I have a demo called Breeze 101, which is the same thing as the CodeCamper 101, and I'll run that real quick. There we go. And up top, you can always tell which demo you're looking at because you can see Breeze 101. And then once I do that, notice the data is the same, everything looks and feels the same. Everything in the app visually is the same. The biggest difference is when I look at this application, I come over to my data service. Now, inside of my data service, I'm using something called Breeze. And what Breeze lets me do is forget speakers. Instead of calling AJAX, I can instead say, here's my query. Go to my speakers and sort them. And then after I sort them, execute this query. And if it worked, take my speakers and get those results and put them into the observable. Now, something you're not seeing here is in the other one, the non-Breeze example, I had to loop through my results, create a new instance of an object, map that to be a knockout observable, and then stick it in my array. What Breeze has let me do is it's smart enough to say, take that entire list of results for me, map them to knockout observables automatically, create models out of them, it's doing all that work for me, and sticks it into the observable. So it gets rid of all that plumbing. Because really, all I want is, if I have data and it comes back, please take the data and stick it in my observable. And therefore, we end up with that. And I can take the same kind of code and repeat that for getting sessions. And then when I prime my data, So when my app first loads, I go get the list of rooms and tracks and sessions. I can actually call to a service down here saying create a query, go get a web service called lookups. Let's take a look at what that one does. So I go to my controllers. In my controller, I have there it is. I have a web service called lookups, and it's going to go off and get a list of rooms, tracks, and time slots using the Entity Framework. And then it's going to put those inside of an array, and it's going to return them as a queryable. So this one little method is going to get all my rooms, tracks, and time slots. My data service is going to use Breeze to say, go call that web service, and then execute it. And when it executes it, notice I don't have a then. Up here, when I got my sessions and speakers, I had a then. Down here, I don't. And the reason for that is when I first load my application, I want to get all the data, but I don't necessarily want to know where it's going yet. I just want to get it locally, stored on the client, so I can cache it. So anytime you make a call with Breeze, and you hit something on the server and you bring back that data, it can automatically put that data into its data context. In this case, I called it a data service, and it's going to store all that data locally here, so I can share those rooms, tracks, and time slots with everybody. So that's an easy way to prime all of my data. And now, because Breeze is managing that data, all the different screens can use it and take advantage of it. So we have one more demo to show here. We'll take Breeze one further step, beyond 2 screens. So here we've got the Jumpstart with Breeze that takes it a little bit further. This one here has my sessions and my speakers, and if I click on a session, we have session details. So what I'm going to do is open up the browser tools, and we'll reload. When I first load this up, we'll look at the network requests. We're getting our lookups. That's all of our time slots and rooms. We're getting alerts to speakers and sessions, just the short information about what's their name, what's their picture. And then let's clear this out. If I click on Sean's session here, we're going to go get one piece of information about Sean. Notice I have session information call. And here's his session. Now, if I go back, no page refreshes, no more network requests. If I click on Ward's session down here, we're going to see another one, another request. Now, here's the cool part about Breeze. I come back, and I click on Sean again, no more requests. It knows that I have that session. I just asked it, hey, do you have these sessions locally? If so, just keep them there. I go back to speakers. I come back here, and I go back to Ward. No more requests. So sharing that data, it's also handling the object graph in here to know that a session has a title. It also has a track, which has a related object, and here's all the tracks that I can have. Now notice, another thing it does in here is it automatically grayed out my cancel and save button. I haven't made any changes. Well, if I change the track from JavaScript for JavaScript Toolbox to practices, Breeze automatically detects there was a change, and I can then interrogate Breeze with an event. Basically, I've got an event that has changes event, which will then tell me, all right, I had changes, something's dirty, go ahead and enable these buttons, and then I can cancel it, which it then goes ahead and changes back to JavaScript, or I can change it to cloud, and I can press save, and when I do that, notice I get a message, it saves successfully. So when I change that to cloud, and let's change its title to foo, like that, let me press save. If I go back to the session list, notice the data on this page is in sync. I did not reload it. All I did was say, I changed the title here, and all these pages are pointing at the same data context in the client. So having rich data saves you a lot of plumbing code. Do you need it? No. You could write a lot of code to do that. So how much code is it to write something with Breeze? With Breeze, what I can do is come through here, and I can pull up the data service, and you can see all those queries that I have. Things in here like get my sessions. Very simple to do. I can say, go get my sessions. Here's the fields I want to get. I don't want to get them all. Just get those and order it by title. Well, inside of something like this, I had 175 lines of code, and I made it pretty robust because it's got saving and canceling and having changes. Let's go over to the real CodeCamper application that I did in the course. If we come look at that application, and we look at the data context, this guy here is at 370 lines of code, and he doesn't have half the functionality. So basically, the data context, my data primer, all of my data services that I'm highlighting over here, my filters that I have, my grouping, all of my models that I have down here, and I'm missing something else. Oh, my sorting. All of those features are things that I had to write, and there's about 1,200 lines of code and all those together. With the Breeze technique, that really cuts it down because it's a lot of plumbing. So you see a lot of repetitive stuff that I did in the CodeCamper app that I don't have to do now that I have another tool to use it. So Breeze does this. Another one that does it is something called JData. If you look at that application, it's another open source app that you can use. And they're both very similar to Upshot, if you've ever seen Upshot, which was the former project by Microsoft. And to be very clear, Upshot is no longer in active development. So if you want to use something like a data context, you probably want to look at Breeze or something like JData, or roll your own solution. So there's one other topic I wanted to show, and I'm going to risk creating a new project. Let's see how many instances of Visual Studio that I have, and then we'll take some questions. So just last week, or the week before, there was a new template introduced into Visual Studio. And that template, if I can find the web page real quick, was called the ASP.NET Fall Preview Update, something like that. Let me do that real quick. Here we go. So I did a blog post on this at johnpapa.net. You can find this. Inside the new single-page apps, basically there's an ASP.NET Fall 2012 Update Build Release. You know, one thing I loved about when I worked at Microsoft is we got to create some really long titles for everything. So here's the big title name. You can download it here, and it gives you basically a starter template for creating a spa. Mads Christensen's the PM on this project, and it's right now a preview, so they're working on kind of making it a little more robust. But the goal of this template is not to replace everything I just showed you, but to give you a good starting place. And it's trying to do it without being prescriptive, meaning it's not going to tell you which library you have to use. It's going to give you a starting point, and then you can change and adjust as you need. If you want to go through the details of this template, this post goes through quite a bit. Let's go ahead and build one real quick, though. So what I've done is I've downloaded that template. I now do a new project. I choose MVC. And then here I can just say, all right, here's the LIDNUG spa. And I can click OK. Notice now I have in here a template called Single Page Application. And I'll go ahead and select that. And we're waiting for it to create. This is where I need some theme music in the background. I should grab my guitar. Here we go. I'll grab my guitar while we wait for this guy to open up. So what this template's going to do when it does open is it's going to give us a to-do app. Basically, just like the Hello World became the canonical example of how do you demo something years ago, it seems these days with a spa, the canonical example is a to-do application. And in the to-do application, they're going to have a list of to-dos that you can create, different sticky notes. And on each of those to-do lists, you can create different items, like grocery list items. So as we create that, it's going to put these lists of items up there. It's going to use data binding to show the data, and it's going to allow us to delete items, add items, save items, and change items. And it is functioning. It's actually loading down below. I'll go back to the web page while it's loading so I can show you some of this. So it's going to create these lists like you're seeing here on the screen. And you can put different items in there, and you can cross them out by checking them. You can delete them, or you can delete an entire list, or you can add a new list. So it's giving you that master details kind of hierarchy. What it doesn't do is it doesn't give you more than one page. So that's kind of the next step I would take this on. And what does it give you? It gives you things like Web API controllers, and it shows you how to write those. It does have authentication authorization, so if you want to put security in your application, which I do highly recommend, it shows you one technique to do that. It's using Entity Framework, just to make it easy. It's got a couple other features in there. The big things, though, as you look through it, is that we can take a look at how the DB context works. It's got a list of to-dos and items. It's got a list of models, so it's got things like to-do item and to-do list. We've got our Web API controllers, and inside of those controllers, we've got methods to go get our data. And then the cool parts are up on the view. So in the view, the entire view is wrapped in a user identity is authenticated technique. And that's going to make sure that you are authenticated. And if not, it's going to bounce you back out to the login screen. And then inside of there, we've got our HTML. And notice the data bind attributes. This is using Knockout. So then we can use Knockout to do, okay, when you click add a new to-do, we're actually going to use the click binding in Knockout to say, go call this method of my view model. When I show my lists, I can list all of my to-dos by doing a for each, And then there's the object that's going to contain my array for all my to-dos. Now we scroll down, we can see our different models that we have. They actually created the models in the client for you to show how to do this. And they created our view models. So all of this has kind of been created up top for you to make it easy to create a template. So here's what got created in Visual Studio. Let's just run this and see what happens. This way you know I didn't make all that up. Normally Visual Studio doesn't take that long. It probably has something to do with the fact that I have multiple instances and LinkedIn, live meeting running at the same time. So here's my to-do service, and I think I have a fake password of John or something like that up here. Isn't that great? I've logged in, I'm not even here. Let me go ahead and try this again. Here, let's just sign up. So I can sign up now. I can type my name and user password in. Hey, there we go. So I just created a new login so I can log into this app, and I can cross items out. I can add a new to-do like get milk. I can delete an item. I can add a new list like speak to LIDNUG. Things to do. Remember not to mute yourself. So I can do all that kind of stuff, and I can delete an entire list as well, right up here. So very simple to do, and it's doing all on the client, and you can see how fast this is. So I can delete things on the fly. The code structure it gives you is very similar to what you saw me go through, other than it doesn't use the separation in the scripts folder. Right here, all of these files that I've highlighted, those are third-party libraries like jQuery and Knockout. So it can use those to do the data binding and then showing the UI. The three modules they give you are a to-do list, which contains your view model and your model. If we look at that here, we can see all of our data items like a to-do item ID and a title. And then it also gives you a data access, which basically wraps up all your AJAX calls to go get your data. And then it's got some custom knockout bindings in here to handle validating items and selection. And those are more knockout specific. They help you give you some of the nice features that you have in the app. But the key ones here are the data access, which goes and gets our data. And notice they're using AJAX as well to go get all the data. And then down the to-do list, we've got our list of to-do items. So I've got a to-do item, a to-do list, and then my to-do list view model, which uses those different guys. The problem with this template that is in current state, it's just a preview again, remember, is a lot of this is hard to take beyond one screen. This is something they're working on, and they've taken a lot of feedback on, and I do expect to see another iteration of this whenever they do drop another drop of this. And I believe they're calling it the fall update. There'll probably be one coming out in a couple of months. But I'm just guessing. So with this kind of an app, you can really start here, see how they're putting things together, and then extend it to do something like adding in Sammy to do page navigation, or breaking out these guys in modules. So here's a module right here showing all of our to-do items, and then you've got your model for items and lists and view models. We've got our data access here, and the data access shows me all these guys in here. Notice that I've got this module called database, and it's got a get list, a save list, a delete list, a save item, and a delete item method. By the way, in Visual Studio, I'm hitting Control-M to collapse everything, and Control-ML to open them. So if I do that, then I can show you just the names of the functions. That's a nice little trick, so you don't have to look at all 56 lines of code. This way you can just see what are the names of all the functions that I'm running, not how did I implement them. So with that, let's look back to the final stuff in the presentation. Looks like we didn't lose as many people in the attendees. That's cool. I know it was a longer technique here, but basically what I hope I gave you here was to jumpstart yourself with spas. The key is to understand modularity first. If you understand what's a spa, and then how do you break apart your modules, make it so you've got small, distinct sets of code. Nobody wants to, well, there's probably somebody out there, but very few people want to maintain an application where you've got a code file with 4,000 lines of code in it. It's a lot easier when you break these things out in different modules, because then you can change how functionality works and really extend it pretty easily. Next step is to figure out how are you going to navigate. Knockout will help with that. And then maybe go to different pages in your application, using Sammy or something to do page routing. And then finally, determine if you need to have rich data in there, or if you want to roll your own technique. And then you can use something like JData or Breeze to do something like that, or roll your own. And when you do that, you want to extend that. What you can do is you can take a look at this course that I've written, and the URL for that is jpapa.me, S-P-A-P-S, it's that plural site. That's a 6.5 hour course on building a spa that builds the full-blown code camper, and it covers this and a lot more topics. Something else I'm working on is I'm actually building an introductory course for spa for a plural site that should be out in a couple of months, and that's going to go over just the core concepts, and we'll cover more how you can use Breeze, how you can get your modularity going out of the gate, and really write a very simple couple-page application for a spa. It's kind of like the beginner spa type course. With all that, I thank you all for coming here, and I will stick around for as many questions as we have. Let's see. I'm going to open those up now and just start reading them and see what happens. So one of the questions here we have is from Leandro. Let me open this up so I can see a full name. Yeah, this is Leandro. Wouldn't it be an idea to bootstrap this content at first page loads and rather than doing all the XHR calls in sequence? Yes, that is one thing to do. And you'll notice when I first loaded the application, I loaded all the data that I was going to use often right in the first load. So that's when the XHR calls happened right at the first page. The only ones I made later on were ones that were infrequent. For example, when I dove into each individual session, that's when I went off and made a separate AJAX request to go get data for that specific session. And the reason I did that is if I'm attending a conference and it's got 500 sessions, I'm probably only going to go see maybe a dozen of them at most, and I probably only want to dive into each of those as I'm clicking on the app. I don't want to load every piece of information about every single data point in the application. If I did want to get all that data, yes, I'd load it all up front. But the technique I recommend is to go get the data you need and then get more as they come along. So, hi John, will you go into why you chose Breeze instead of JData? I chose Breeze instead of JData because it was my preference. There was no real functional reason when I looked at the two of them, which one I chose, other than that I felt Breeze was much easier to navigate and feel my way through. It had the nice link query syntax. I felt like setting up out of the gate. It was very easy to get going. Quite frankly, when I started using Breeze, it took me less than a couple of days to get the application converted to using it. Could JData do that? Probably could. And I think having the fact that there's two good competitors out there is always a good thing. So I wouldn't say either one is better than the other so much as, pick the one that suits you best. Oh yeah, I knew this question was coming. Is the source code for CodeCamper available? I will make all the samples for the CodeCamper Jumpstarts available following this presentation. I'll put up my blog. Actually, I think they might already be available in a previous incarnation on my blog right now if you want to go and get a Jumpstart on there. I posted a presentation I did with Dev Connections a couple days ago, and I demonstrated some of these. So you can go grab those there. The full-blown CodeCamper, I believe you have to be a Pluralsight Plus subscriber to grab the full-blown application. Question, namespace from Crudo. I'm assuming he's asking, did you create a namespace, or would you create one? Yes, I would create a namespace in my applications so I can have my modules get out of the global namespace. And simply what I do in a lot of apps is I use app, A-P-P, as an object that I create, and then I can put all my view models and everything else on top of that. Have I tried AngularJS from Martin Anderson? Yes, I have, not extensively. It's one of the other frameworks I do have a fond inclination towards. So I like Knockout a lot because it's just pure data binding. Angular does data binding in a similar way. It's slightly different, but it also adds a bunch of other features too. My preference right now is to use Knockout, but I have know a lot of people who use Angular and are very happy with it. Question, Greg Howe. Where could you do a lot of client-side data storage if you drill down a lot of sessions and speakers? Is there a performance hit coming or a need to clear out the oldest data sets? The easy answer in that is, yeah, at some point you're going to have a performance hit depending on how much data you load. If you're loading a couple hundred records on here and you do it wisely, meaning you don't wire an event every time you do something, do like every single one of those thousands of rows, you're pretty well off. And in fact, in the CodeCamper, when we were testing it out, one of my tests was to load up 1,000 sessions and 1,000 speakers and kind of nest those, and it performed very admirably. Like anything, though, you definitely want to keep an eye on performance and see what you're doing. That's also one of the reasons I don't load every single data point up front. I only load the ones that I need. The other side is you have to deal with clearing out your data as you go if you don't want to get stale data. So eventually you're going to want to expire your cache on the client, and when it expires, then go get fresh data. And that's something you have to decide in your application. Another question from Raja. What is the back-end code that all these method calls make to WCF libraries? Actually, it's Web API that I'm using, but it could be anything that's an HTTP endpoint. So you could use WPF. You could actually use ASMX if you wanted to. If you want, you could actually have a PHP backend or a Java backend with web services. It doesn't have to be a .NET backend. Also, do I need to individually download all the third-party libraries, or are they bundled with Spot template? That's a good question. So if you're going to use the ones in the Spot template that I showed, the Spot template will give you Knockout, and it'll give you jQuery. It gives you jQuery Validate, jQuery UI, and Modernizer. So it gives you those right out of the box, plus some starting points for the view models or the to-do lists. If you want to use like Sammy or Toaster, the library I wrote, which does the pop-ups, then you'll have to use something like NuGet to go get them. And I do highly recommend using NuGet for that. Another question here from Will. How would you integrate Breeze with SignalR? I see how easy it is to work Web API, not yet sure with SignalR. That's a great question. It's something I'm working on right now. One of my things I'm working on for the next SPA course is how would I notify the UI if something changes? So let's say you're at the code camp and somebody changes a session on the server. I want all the mobile phones out there and tablets that have Code Camper to automatically change and get new information whenever that happens so I can update the session. Maybe instead of Ward Bell speaking at it, it's John Papa. So what I could do is use SignalR on the server to broadcast out, hey, this session changed from this to that. And then I can integrate that with Breeze. I haven't done this yet with Breeze, but it's very high on my list, and definitely look at my course for that as it's coming up. Grant is asking, using Breeze allows you to query a cache set of data without making more server calls. Yes. How would you update the client if the data were changed on the server? Well, that's a question that you have to figure out how your app wants to work. So you've got an app, you go get a list of sessions, you need to know when data has changed. So you can either have the server notify you, and then your client-side code would automatically refresh, or you could just make certain decision points on if somebody manually has a refresh button on the UI. That's another UI paradigm to say, okay, if I have a manual refresh, I'm going to invalidate my cache and go off and get new data. There's no one way to do this. It really depends upon how your business and your operation needs to work. With Breeze and SPAs and all the techniques I showed today, there's no limitations on that. I'm going to show a couple demos of how to do that inside my course. Can I talk about validation, something like data annotations in your presentation? Yes. So you can do validation, and if you look at my full-blown course on Pluralsight, I do HTML5 validation, and I do some validation without HTML5 as well. Breeze, one of the nice things about Breeze is if you use Entity Framework or use simple data annotations on the back end, and you've got a required field, Breeze can then grab that information in its metadata and brings it to the client for you. And then on the client, Breeze is aware in the data context that you have required fields or max length or min length or other rules, and it can automatically apply them for you. So that's something it will do. And there's examples on the breezejs.com webpage for that. Another question is about Backbone. Is it good or bad versus Knockout? It's good. It's fine. Backbone, Angular, and Knockout are three very, very popular frameworks, and they're all great. I have a preference for Knockout. If I had a second choice, I would probably use Angular. Backbone, I'm not a big fan of Backbone, but it's something we could do. And I believe there's examples of Breeze with Backbone up on the website. Next question. Where can we get the to-do template for MVC? Is it available in 2010? You can get the to-do template for MVC by going to my blog at johnpapa.net, and then there's a link right in there for the Spot template. It's up on the ASP.NET website. It's free download. It just integrates with Visual Studio 2012. I do not believe it's available for 2010, but I'd have to check into that. That's a good question. Another question. Can a SPA be used for enterprise-level app having around 200 views? 200 views, that's a lot. I have not built a SPA with 200 views. I've only built a few applications in my life with 200 views, to be very honest with you. Usually in something like WPF. Could it be built to do something like that? Yeah, it could, but I'd probably ask you to look at it in a different way. Instead of building a SPA with 200 views, or any app with 200 views, I like to build multiple smaller apps with smaller subsets. So maybe build 5 apps with 40 views, for example. So you can break these applications up into smaller bite-sized pieces. It'll help you whether you're building a SPA or a Windows app or a WPF app or just any kind of an application in general. When and where will the updated code and PowerPoint presentation be available? It will be on my blog at johnpapa.net, which is the big link on the screen here, and I will put it up there within 24 hours. Is a spa a good choice for real-time financial applications such as stock trading? So in all the financial apps that I've written or had dealings with, the biggest crutch was always in one thing. If a financial application needs to have 5,000 operations per second from the server, that's a lot. That's where something like SignalR can really help you out. So that, to me, is not a SPA issue. It's more just the app. You've got to be able to get that sockets working, like a WPF app or something that, like with SignalR, where you can use pure sockets to get that data from the server back to the client. So for that, it's not so much as a SPA good choice as how is that communication from the server to the client going to work? So would a SPA be fine for that? Sure, as long as you're using sockets to get that data to and from. When would you use MVC4 app with controllers over a single page web API app? Honestly, I'd use them together. So you can use MVC4 app to create your views and kind of build them out of the gate, which is what the SPA template does, and then build in the SPA stuff for that rich UX experience that you have. Another option you have is if you don't want to build for multiple browsers, so SPA is definitely more HTML and client-side heavy. If you purely can wait for the postbacks and you don't need that rich UX experience, and you don't need to reach all those kind of devices that would really benefit from that, then a pure MVC4 app is perfectly fine. So it's not an either or. It could be, you could choose pure MVC or you could use MVC with SPA. Would you change this technique of developing an enterprise app with hundreds of pages? I think we just answered that here. Yeah, I would just build smaller pieces of them at a time. The second link to the app does not work. Oh, I think that's because it's capital. It does work. It's not capital SPAPS. I think it's lowercase SPAPS. That's a bit.ly that I have. Sorry about that. That font only does uppercase. How do you take care of data validity? Server might have modified data. Does the client know about the update? So being valid data, that's where something like Breeze would help you out. Knockout has a plugin called Knockout Validation, which will help you basically generate validation rules on the client, so you can show it to the user when something's valid or invalid. That's something I do in the course that I have already with the knockout validation. And a server has, the data has a modified, that's where I have some kind of a timestamp field inside my data. So when I get the data on the server, I can compare it and make sure the data has not been updated or modified. That's just dealing with concurrency. Do we still need to use a unit work pattern on the server side if we use Breeze? So those are kind of two different things. Breeze doesn't care if you have a unit of work or not. So that's completely irrelevant to it. If you want to use Breeze, the unit of work, great. If you want to use it without it, that's fine too. What I did in this simple sample is I just used pure web services talking to the entity framework. And the entity framework implements its own kind of unit of work in the DB context. So just to simplify it, the CodeCamper Jumpstart uses a unit of work which is built into the entity framework, DB context. And it does that for you. And it's also a repository. So would you still need to build a unit of work on top of it? That's really up to you. Building a pure unit of work is a much better separation pattern, but it's more code. If you have a smaller app and you don't want to do that, you want to build just use Entity Framework directly, or something like Hibernate, they actually implement their own unit of works. Either way, to answer your original question, they both work with Breeze. Considering the power of SPA, what is the future of server-side apps that are also not able to run in Metro IE? Honestly, building that kind of an application, if you want to build a SPA, they're great because they'll run in the Metro IE browser, IE10, Google Chrome, Safari, pretty much anywhere you want, based upon what the HTML and CSS you're using is. And you can use tools like Modernizer to help you get there, or HTML5 boilerplate is a great starting point. If you want to learn more about that, you definitely want to check out my course, and I think it's in the 4th module. I talk a lot about how you can get started to build a SPA that works in multiple browsers. And I'm finding a lot of apps that I did with things like Silverlight or Flash, I can do in SPA just as easily. We had a question about Backbone. I think I've already answered that. Have you looked at TypeScript for strong type checking? Yes, actually, Dan Wallin and I are writing a TypeScript course right now, which is due in like 2 weeks, and I better get my butt moving because I'm a little behind on it. And basically, it's going to be a jump start for TypeScript. TypeScript is basically a superset of JavaScript, which allows you to have type checking. So you can do things like define variables as strings. You can create a class. So classes don't exist in JavaScript, but there's a way to implement them using modules. And TypeScript gives you all those kind of static type checking features and debugging that you can use, and it generates pure JavaScript. So that's, yes, something I definitely looked at, and I would absolutely suggest anybody who is used to a static language like .NET with C# or maybe Java. How unit testable is this? Very. So the code that I wrote, my Code Camper Jumpstarts and the full Code Camper are very unit testable. The revealing module pattern gives you a very clean interface on what you should test. And if you look at the full Code Camper app in Pluralsight, there's actually several unit tests for the view models that you can take a look at, and on my data services. Do I suggest Backbone.js for spas? Yeah, absolutely. I think Backbone, Angular, Knockout are 3 great examples of a way to build a spa. It's really whatever one you're more comfortable with. I find people with a XAML type background like the Knockout technique better. I find people who have more of an MVC background and less XAML like the Backbone technique better. Are there any examples using TypeScript for modules? Yes, if you go to the typescriptlang.org URL, that's typescriptlang.org. There's several examples on there using modules, and there'll be more in my course with Dan Wallin, which I believe will probably be out realistically in early December. Any tools or plugins for Knockout data binding? I fully expect there to be some really good visual editor tools for Knockout coming soon. I have strong indications that we may see some. Knockout's really growing in popularity. That's all I can say at this point. Let's see here now. Did I get it right that you would be trying to use SignalR to update your cache? Yes, I would. I probably, it depends on what the data is, but there's 2 ways to do that. You could use SignalR to actually send the new data up and then let it update your cache. Or alternatively, you could just use SignalR to send a message saying, hey, there's new data. If you want to get it, go get it now. So that's kind of the way you could handle that. And Joel Cochran's asking, can you update the Breeze data objects from JavaScript? Yes, you could. And will the bindings automatically push your Knockout? Yes. So Breeze basically just converts your objects to Knockout observables for you. And then you have access to those if you'd like to, where you can actually update and modify the model. Are you familiar with the roadmap of Breeze? Yes, somewhat I am. Is there plan to support local data storage technologies like WebSQL and IndexedDB? Yeah, I'm not sure if it's actually implemented yet, but I definitely know that's on the roadmap. It's something I've talked with them about. And if you want to use something right now, too, that doesn't use Breeze, you can also use, like in my Code Camper Pluralsight demo, I use amplify.js to do that. The nice advantage of using something like amplify.js to do web storage is that since there's like 5 different ways to do it, depending on the browser you're in, amplify.js actually figures out what browser you're using, and it'll implement it for you. So we've got about 10 questions left. I'll just rip through these quick. What about a view unload as in release bindings? So the first question I'd say, do you need to release your bindings? That really depends upon what you're doing with those. If your data is not going to change, there's really no harm in leaving those bindings there in a hidden state on a view. If you're worried about having multiple views and wanting to just unload them from memory, yeah, you could absolutely take the whole thing out of memory. There's some techniques with Knockout where you can do that. And I suggest you take a look at the Knockout site for that information. There's quite a bit up there. Will a spa template using TypeScript be in the future? That's a good question. I haven't asked that, but I will ask the team next time I talk to them. Right now, the spa template is a preview, and the TypeScript is an alpha. So at this point, there's a lot of room for change and growth. I'm not sure where it's going to end up, but hopefully we have a good roadmap from both those teams. And there are different teams, but definitely one thing I can promise is that you will definitely be seeing TypeScript examples of spas from me in the Pluralsight courses and on my blog. Okay, from Mark Gordon, on Pluralsight, did your spa class make the building Knockout class outdated? Let me see here. If not, what other classes cover? Okay, so you're asking what in my course might I replace based on what I showed today? No, the course is definitely not outdated at this point. If it was, I would update it. But if you go through Module 8, I believe, in my course on Pluralsight, it's all about the data context. I hand-rolled an entire data context in that course. And that was just Module 8. And I explained when I did that if I had something like Breeze or Upshot or JData, I would have used that. So showing how the data context works, I think is still very valuable because you show all the things that it's actually doing for you. If I was to write this from scratch, I would absolutely use something like Breeze or JData to do that, though. And I will be showing that in the new course, too. From Peter Shaw, one of the LIDNUG guys, why would I choose a SPA over a traditional model? Probably like MVC. I think we talked a little about that. If you want that rich, fluid experience, that's great. If you want more reach without pinging the server and constant postbacks, that's a great option too. If you want to cache data on the client, so you don't have to keep making, not postbacks, but AJAX calls, that's a great option for a SPA. If none of those things mean anything to you, then you probably don't want to look at a SPA. That is, would you consider deciding factors or one or the other? I already talked about that. Multi-page is great. Transferring small data is a great option too. Theron, if this is not related to SPA, please ignore me. No problem, I'll ask anyway. Let's see here. What guidelines would you use to determine whether your backend would be MVC controller or a Web API controller? Good question. So you could actually create an MVC controller with JSON actions, or you could use a Web API controller, which automatically returns JSON for you, or you could use WCF or ASMX. My rule of thumb here is if I don't have any constraints in the back end, I'm going to use Web API. Bottom line is Web API is built for this kind of stuff, and it's easier. It's more modern. It's got more of a path for this kind of stuff. But you can absolutely use the other technologies. So I've worked with some companies who use WCF, and we've tied SPAs into WCF doing that too. So as long as you can return your JSON, you're good to go. From Chris Platt, can you talk about how to use dynamic templates? Yeah, actually, there's a whole section in my course that talks about dynamic templates in the ProSite course. Where basically, if I had like 10 views, instead of going and loading all 10 views up front, what I do is I actually load the templates on demand. And Knockout has an extension, a library that'll let you do that for you. So it kind of plugs in real nice and easy. So let's see here. This must be Rob Eisenberg. Rob, if none of you know, or some of you don't know, he's a brilliant guy who's got a couple great libraries like Caliburn Micro for Silverlight. So he's got a plug here. If you're using Knockout and jQuery, you could also use a library he's written that's JavaScript-based called Durandal. Maybe I'm pronouncing this incorrectly. But if you look this up, it's Durandal. It's another SPA library that's out. That's looks pretty good. I haven't looked at it too closely, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. So Mike's asking, what about Knockout.mapping? Why did I decide not to use it? To be very frank, when I first did Knockout stuff like 2 years ago, I used it a lot. Knockout mapping is a plugin which basically takes your JSON objects and will map them into Knockout observables for you, and then vice versa when you send them back to the server. I chose not to use that because once I started getting into more complicated examples with it, I found it did a little too much for me and it made it hard to customize things. So I decided that I just would do all the mapping myself or use another tool like Breeze to do that. So Knockout mapping I found is good for simple scenarios, but it kind of fell down, in my opinion, for more complex ones. Questions for, let's see, in your full course, you use require.js for model dependencies and asynchronous loading. Is there a way to lazy on-demand load modules like views? Yeah, the views you can lazy load by either using require.js with, I believe it's called a text plugin, T-E-X-T, or you can use the Knockout plugin written by Jim Cowart. That's Jim, C-O-W-A-R-T. And I believe, I forget the name of it now, it's external modules. It's a Knockout plugin that's in my full ProSite course, which I use to load views on the fly. So you can use require.js to do that, or you could use the Knockout plugin to do it, or alternatively, you could just use AJAX to go get them as you need. But I definitely would get those views on demand. I wouldn't load them all from the start if there are, For templating, would I use Knockout templates or something else? Yeah, I like the Knockout templates, quite frankly. I find them easy to use and it's very integrated. I only use other templating engines like Underscore, Mustache, Handlebars, or JS Render if I need pure, fast templates with read-only data and I've got to show, 10,000 items. So here we've got one of the guys who works on Breeze, Wardbell, friend of mine, says the Breeze site has examples of saving and restoring entities to local browser storage. Okay, cool. So they have implemented, this answers the question from before, Breeze does have a way to save data on local storage and then pull it back out. Thank you, Ward. David's question, going forward, will you use Breeze in your class examples? Yeah, I will. I'm going to start out without Breeze. So you saw in the Codecamp or Jumpstart, I have a sample without it, just to show people what to do. Because my general technique is I don't like to show somebody a library until I show them how to do it without the library. Because sometimes that answers the question of why do I want to use this. But yes, in most of my examples, I'm going to be using something like Breeze. Thanks for your time. Tutorial is good. Yep, no problem. Another question. Last question. We have a spot cache with data on the client side. Some of the users can edit, delete, and create. How can we apply changes for other users? That's something that's cool with, you can either do with expiring the cache yourself, or you could use like SignalR to notify when new data comes through. So SignalR is one of the top things on my list that I'd look at showing in some of my future demos and how we can integrate that kind of features. With that, I don't know how many questions we asked here, but we had quite a few. I think I answered most of the questions we have here. If there's any others, please shoot them through here. If not, you can definitely contact me on my blog at johnpapa.net. I've got an email up there on a contact page. Or you can find me on Twitter at @John_Papa. And I thank you all for bearing with us and sticking around for an hour and a half, and I hope it was useful.
Excellent. Fantastic. I hope John can hear me. If not, I'll make sure I have a chat with him at some other stage and thank him for a brilliant presentation. As usual, John, this was phenomenally good. I certainly enjoyed it, and I actually learned quite a lot regarding SPA. And I'm sure, considering all the questions we had, that quite a few people here found it very interesting. Quick note on getting questions: if it's being recorded, yes, all of our events are recorded and will be uploaded to our LIDNUG, our YouTube channel, which is, there you go, is youtube.com/LIDNUG. There you go, Cecil. I'm not sure how many questions we had. I counted 20 plus at one stage, so pretty impressive, John. And we will also let everybody know when John uploads the code camper source code and anything else, his slides or whatever else he's going to upload. Last but not least, I can definitely highly recommend people having a prototype subscription. There's quite a lot of value in the high quality training courses that they have on a variety of topics. And one amongst those, of course, is John Papa as well. So to that end, thank you, everybody. We may be sitting and chatting a little bit afterwards. And
I'll stay around too. If anybody has any other questions, I'll be happy to stick around.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, John. Other than that, this was our last event for 2012. Of course, we will be back again in 2013 with a new range of presentations.
I still see some questions in the thing here. I'm happy to answer any that people have.
Okay, we're clear.
Oh, asking for the spelling under Randall. I believe it's, let me type it.